Are we waiting for someone, or we just start off?
Sir, I think we can start our session. All will be joining in soon.
Okay, great. So thanks, Rajlakshmi, for that brief introduction. Um, I'll share my screen. Before I do that, um, let me also give a background about me. So I'm not a doctor. I am an engineer by training, and like Dr. Rajlakshmi was saying, um, been involved with palliative care. Um, I would say right from the beginning, 92, 93, as a volunteer, and recently over the last 4 5 years, I've been more involved with the activities of Pallium India more closely, and more on the management side and administrative side of things right now. So happy to be here. I understand that this is a team of students, PG students from the PMR. Am I right, Rajeshmi?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes. Okay, so shall I share my screen?
Sure, sir.
So, is it visible?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, thank you. All right. So, I think you have already uh, had a session on opioid availability and the management side of storing opioids and things like that. Rajarashmi, is it already covered?
No, sir, it is there next week by
Okay.
Rajaval, sir. So it's
What
up to
about
them.
communication?
Yes, sir. They have completed all other classes. Only remaining one is this opioid availability session, end of life care session. Rest everything is over.
Okay. So typically, when it comes to organizing palliative care, what most people would expect would be, session around again the clinical aspects, um, how to ensure that medicines are available, and those kind of things. Here we are not going to touch upon those things, and we're going to touch upon the a few other aspects. I'll just briefly go through those. So it's mostly about volunteering, collaborating, advocacy, and fundraising. So what is the relevance here? So we'll go into deeper into it. I mean, it's we may not be able to cover the entire thing in 1.5 hours. It's a challenge, but we'll see how far we can cover those topics. So before moving into it, now this is a definition of palliative care, which we are all familiar with. It's the WHO definition of palliative care, and it talks about assessment and treatment of pain and other symptoms, other problems, physical, psychosocial, and spiritual. Now that's fine. I mean, we are clear about the definition. Now the question is, who is supposed to provide this? Whose business is it? Providing palliative care. Now, any guesses? I mean, anyone can step in. You can just put in um, your suggestions on the chat. Um,
It's the
Dr. Anand?
society or the government.
sorry, sorry.
I was just saying the society.
Yeah. So I heard someone saying, was it Jijo who said that?
No.
My name
I
is
didn't say-
Anand. Anand.
Anand. So Anand, you mentioned it's the responsibility of the government. Did I hear that correctly at first?
Yeah, I said society as well as government. Basically, I meant everyone.
Yeah. Okay. That was fun. Okay. So I'll make sure that I don't repeat that mistake. Yeah. So we consider this as everyone's business. Why? What is the role of others apart from the healthcare professionals like you, who are trained, trained as doctors, as healthcare providers? Of course, there are nurses and other social workers and others who are also trained. Now, we can understand all of them, but what about others? When we say everyone, we're talking about the rest of it. What is their role? Why should they be involved? Why is it that you consider that they also need to be involved in palliative care? So Anand, it is up to you. Now you have a hello, Anand. You still there?
Yeah, sir. Because it is a holistic and comprehensive process, so you need everyone's involvement.
Oh, very good. Okay, so holistic. Um, everyone's involvement. Now, can you also suggest who all should be involved? When you say everyone, like I'm an engineer, what is my role? What is my business here, right? What is my role here? What can I do? Others are also welcome to contribute.
Engineers role. Hmm.
Do you want me to? Now, if I come to the Trivandrum Medical College, I believe we are all students in Trivandrum Medical College, right?
Yes, sir.
So I walk into your department and I say, I want to be part of your team or
Hmm.
work with you. Will you let me
Yeah.
in?
Yeah, sure, sir. We will definitely let you in.
And then what would you want me to do? How would you like
Because particularly in our department, we need the role of engineers when we are actually treating disability in people.
Okay.
So what happens is that most of the times we cannot bring about an improvement in the condition of the patient medically. So architectural differences or technological assistance to the patients can bring about improvement in the quality of life of the patients. So technology can assist them in mitigating their problems.
Brilliant.
So
Thank
in
you.
that way,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you want me to contribute my engineering skills. You
Yeah.
assume that I have the skill set to provide your patients with some kind of support, right? Am I right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So anything else?
Anything else as
Anand,
a concerned citizen?
concerned
Okay.
citizen. Okay. As a concerned citizen, what else would you like me to do? Others are also welcome, right? It need not just be Anand talking about this.
About bringing in awareness
Awareness.
and just as you said, advocacy.
Okay. Advocacy. That is again awareness. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Okay, good.
okay.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll explore what all. Um, so let me first thank you for letting me in because if only if you are able to let me in as part of your team, then can I contribute. When you say palliative care is everyone's business, um, that's fine. But then unless we ask palliative care, or let us not worry about palliative care as healthcare providers, unless you let me in as part of your team, I will not be able to contribute anything. Now, this is something which most of us are familiar with, especially once you have gone through palliative care, the initial what you call concept of pain and all those things. We have this concept of total pain, right? Which is not just the physical pain, what we refer to normally. It is a total pain which includes the physical, psychological, social, and spiritual aspects. And mostly it has got to do with the patient's or the family's life circumstances also. Now, how do we manage this pain? So it's about, like you said, a care team which works together with an interdisciplinary approach. Now, like for example, the PMR team will have to probably work with the neuro, I guess, department. Am I right? Normally you do work a lot with the neurology department, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And there could be other departments also whom you interact with to provide this care. And it also needs to take into account the patient's and the family's goals and needs. So my question is, who are the team members? Anand, others request others to contribute here. Now we understand that it's an interdisciplinary approach. We understand it's about a care team working together, a care plan. All these things are fine, but who are the team members? Assume that there is this patient who needs palliative care. Who are the team members who you want to be there to help him or her with the care delivery? So how many of us are here now? At least,
We have 11 doctors now, sir.
yeah, very good. So I'll wait for response from others.
Yeah, we will need doctors and
Okay. Doctors,
somebody in the government officials
government officials, yes.
to provide the drugs. We have to involve somebody in the drug distribution.
Okay.
There obviously there will be need of a pharmacist,
Pharmacist.
and we would need an office or a building. And
Okay. So who is the team member there? Office of the or the building is the infrastructure. So
yeah,
so the infrastructure to be provided by who?
either it should be publicly funded
Okay. Okay.
or private.
Okay.
Or
And
a NGO.
can also pitch in. You can just put it in the chat. It'd be much more convenient, So everyone can. Now, there is no rocket science here. We are talking about something which we are all familiar with. It's happening around us. It's just about just thinking about it, and I'm sure you'll be able to bring in new concepts also. So you can use the chat. You can just put it in whatever you feel from your perspective would be a good addition to the team, or who all should be there in the team of care providers. Okay. So we'll move forward. Then, yes, doctors, nurses, pharmacists. Now, social workers. Now, I think they're increasingly playing a role, major role. What about music therapists? We all know that these are people who also can make a difference to the lives of palliative care patients. Counselors, occupational therapists, physiotherapists. Again, in your case, more so with physiotherapists, right? And the team that we often forget about is volunteers and caregivers. Who are a part of that caregiver team? Anyone? Other than this, do you see anyone else as part of the caregiver team?
The family and
Family,
relatives
spiritual
of the
leaders.
patient.
Absolutely. Thank you. Who said that? Anand?
Jijo.
Thank you, Anand. Yeah, you're right. Anyone else? Did we miss someone else?
Mm.
Okay. So what about the patient? Do you want him or her as part of your team?
Yes,
Why?
because we should cater the things according to the needs of the patient.
Hmm.
So the patient should also be a part of the decision making.
Absolutely. Now, if you involve the patient also, unless you involve the patient also into as part of your team, you'll not be able to provide the right kind of care, even identifying what that patient needs or the family needs, and fine-tuning it, fine-tuning our service offering. And even like, for example, we see situations where, we say, okay, you need to have regular physiotherapy. Every day you have to spend half an hour doing these exercises. Now, of course, we can provide a physiotherapist. We can provide the necessary tools if it is required. All those things can be taken care of. But ultimately, what if the patient decides not to do any of these things? I am not willing to spend half an hour doing these exercises. What do? All the others will be just spectators. Now, that is the reason why the patient also should be part of your team, because once you have that person as part of your team, your work will be made easier. Because unless he or she decides to be actively involved in finding a solution for his or her needs, you will not be able to achieve the kind of success that you want. So essentially, in short, I would say anyone who can contribute in improving the quality of life of the patient and family, and that includes me. I am also willing to, as one of the volunteers, because I don't fall into the other categories. Now, as you said, as an NGO, maybe I'm able to offer my technical skills, but there are other things probably where I can also be involved, like, for example, the awareness part of it and some more. We'll also look at those things. So here, what we should understand, from a general perspective is, like you mentioned, Anand mentioned earlier, at the macro level, the healthcare system, it includes the government hospitals, the government machinery, the private sector, the hospitals, the clinics, all those things at the macro level. Now, at the micro level, again, any takers? I mean, what is at the macro level? Micro level. I understand the macro level is, all these hospitals, the healthcare system in general, everything is there. Now, what is available at the micro level? What is the kind of healthcare that is available at the micro level? Who is involved?
The patient and the nearest family and friends.
Yes. So if I have a fever, I have probably an illness, maybe even corona to start with. Okay. So who gives me the first level of care? Who supports me? Who makes sure that my what you call the temperature is taken, the I am able to get sufficient rest, I'm able to get the necessary medications. Who provides all this? It is the family. That is always at the first level, and most often the only healthcare system available, especially in the case of palliative care patients, especially if it is a bedridden patient or someone in a wheelchair. I'm sure they have to depend a lot on this family at the micro level. Now, there is one other level which we often miss. We call it the meso level, and this is what makes things interesting. This is where the society, as we just discussed about, the society is involved. Now, at the meso level, there is a lot of support, help, care that is available, which often goes unidentified, which is often not tapped, I would say. It's like a treasure chest. And most often you'll find that whatever you need to provide the right kind of care for the family, it is available out there. It is available in the society. It's called the social capital. But unfortunately, it's like a treasure chest for which you don't have the key, or you've lost the key. Now, if you are able to identify that key and open this treasure chest, I can guarantee you most of your concerns, most of the challenges that you face in providing the right kind of care, they disappear. Now, and volunteering makes that possible. A volunteer is one out of this community that is out there, whom we can actually rely upon, whom we seldom forget about. I mean, we often forget about, not seldom, often forget about. So who is the volunteer? This is the definition. And it says someone who need not be ordered or assigned a job, they take on that responsibility on themselves. Now, does that really happen? Have you seen it happening? Any of you? Have you volunteered? Any one of you, have you volunteered?
Yeah.
Who's that?
Myself, Anand.
Anand. Okay. What did you do, Anand? I mean, where did you volunteer? Just curious.
No, it was during the school days. We had gone to communities during our vacation time.
Hmm.
In places, colonies like the kayar making colonies, and
Okay.
we helped people as part of a group,
Okay.
volunteer group.
Great. So, what made you do that? Did someone ask you to do that?
I cannot say that it is completely voluntary. It's part of a school vacation program, and they asked whoever wants to join can join.
Was it part of the NSS group or something
No,
like
no,
that?
no, not part of NSS.
Okay. Okay. Good. And what did you get out of it? Did you get anything out of that? out of
Um,
that, the volunteering work that you did?
Experiences.
Okay.
um, Other than that, no, nothing else I can say.
Okay, experiences. Okay. Anyone else who has volunteered? Any experiences you want to share here? No one else? Interesting. Okay, so we'll move forward. Um, Now, the question is, what makes them do it, right? Why should someone volunteer? Why should someone get involved? Of course, as a doctor, um, you'll also be getting a salary. Of course, the salary is there. Plus, you will you'll also probably look at providing the care as part of your responsibility, as a duty, um, because you've been trained to do that and you have been assigned that task. Now, let's take the case of K.N. Nair. K.N. Nair is now 65 years old, sorry. That's his background. He went into the army at the age of 17. He retired in 92. In 2002, his wife was diagnosed and it was stage 3 and it was already pretty bad. Now, it's not like, they went to meet an oncologist the first time in 2002. At least prior to that, at least for 3 or 4 years, this gentleman was taking his wife to various doctors. And again, he's from Trivandrum. So almost all the known oncologists, the big hospitals, and she was having pain in the abdomen, I believe. And what happened was almost 3 years, it was not diagnosed. The cancer was not diagnosed. And by the time it was diagnosed, it was already too late. And then she died in another 2 years. Now, I want you to imagine yourself in his position. Assume that you are K.N. Nair. What would you do? Or what would you be going through? Let me put it that way. So, if I imagine I'm in his shoes, so what would I be going through? Again, you can use the chat. That would be ideal. You can just put it in whatever. What are the feelings that he would have gone through? What would have been his emotional state at that point of time? Whatever you feel like contributing. Yeah. And by the way, let me ask you one more question. Is this palliative care program, training program, is it compulsory for you, or is it like you have opted in? Rajalakshmi, how is it? How did this group come together?
So they have opted in to join. We are first time training a group from a department as such.
Okay, very good. Okay.
So Dr. Jijo has responded to what you have just asked. Despair is what he says.
Okay, okay. So why am I not able to see that? Just hold on. I think, oh, okay, okay. Despair, absolutely, Jijo. Thank you. Anyone else? My question is, if you were in his situation, what do you think would be your feelings, emotional state, whatever you want to share, what I just want you to look at the situation from his point of view. Despair, of course. What else? I'm sure you can do better than that. I mean, there are so many people all doing their MD. Anand has a smile. Is it Anand who is smiling? Yes.
Yes.
What is behind that smile, Anand? Now, this has to be fun. I don't want this to be like a monologue. I don't believe in that. This has to be interesting. And there are a lot of these
I
things
think
I'm already aware of. I don't need to be teaching you all this stuff. Yeah.
I think at that point a person might feel like his life is a void, a vacuum,
Okay. Yes.
and sometimes bereavement, a prolonged bereavement, and
Mhm. Okay, got it. Yes, you are right. What else?
Dr. Asha says denial.
Denial. Okay. Asha, can you explain that a bit?
Dr. Asha, can you unmute from your end and speak?
It find it difficult situation. He may not accept the fact that it was a deadly disease like that.
Hmm. Okay. So it is, it might be difficult for him to accept that this is a disease which can be so fatal. Is that what you're trying to say, Asha? Jijo,
Yes.
helplessness. Okay. Okay. Helplessness. Yes. Now things are getting more interesting. What else? Rebecca, Shrito, Serena, Sinju, injustice. Okay, Jijo, guilty, frustrated, very true, hopeless. But I think he is brave enough to handle his emotions. Okay, he is brave enough to handle his emotions, probably because, we feel that he is brave enough because he is in the army. Is that, Sinjita, is that the reason why you feel he's brave enough to handle his emotions? Yeah, okay. Hmm. Okay. So all valid, everything, whatever you have mentioned here are all valid. I'll just pick out one or two which I feel is very interesting. Guilty. Dr. Mong, how do you, I mean, sorry if my pronunciation is wrong.
Yes, it's Mung. Yeah.
Mong, okay.
He
Dr.
might
Mong, can you just,
he might feel a little bit of guilty, like as his wife is might die or gonna die, so he could have been a better husband before, or he could have done a better job towards her, towards his wife, better care before in the past, like that. But he might not have done that, or he might not have time to do all these things, or cannot catch up again to be a better husband. So he might feel guilty because of that.
absolutely, yes. Now, what if, in this particular case, Dr. Mong,
Yeah.
the interesting part was he was actually with his wife. He was the one who was taking her to all these oncologists, all the hospitals, all by himself. He was
Yeah.
because by the time he was already retired.
Yeah. Yes.
Now, still, is it possible that he might be feeling guilty even after doing all these things?
Yeah, there could be some guilt, before, because even if he tried to be a good husband, now he might not be, his wife is not in a position to enjoy, I mean, to be with him all the time and spending time together in other places or another time except in the hospital like that. So he might not be able to do all the things he wants with her. So he might be feeling a little bit of guilt still then.
Yes, and this is strange, you know. So even if we have done all that as physically possible, still we might end up in that situation of guilt and unfairness. Yeah, unfairness from, again, I would expect you to just elaborate on that. Unfair.
Unfair in a sense that out of all the couple or out of all the a human being in this world, why this kind of things happen to me specifically like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. All this, yes, I totally agree with you. There's a lot of guilt feeling, and due to all these reasons.
Yeah.
Not just that. Now, if by the time that cancer was identified, the oncologists who really identified the cancer, can you imagine what would have been that conversation like? What would he have mentioned to him? Or what would have been the conversation between him and the oncologist who actually diagnosed this? Any takers?
Like if she's diagnosed, then at the time, then he might want to know that how long she has left like that. Is there any care or what should I do? Like that kind of question might pop up.
Hmm. Possible treatment, yeah. So this is something which normally doctors say unknowingly. Um, if you had brought her to me earlier, or if you could have brought her to the hospital, or this was diagnosed earlier, we could have done something more. Have you heard that?
Yeah.
Why didn't you bring her earlier? Now, this is something which is not self-inflicted guilt. It could be from the other side also. It could be from the community. It could be from the doctors. I'm not saying only the doctors will say this. Even the community, his own family members or relatives would have said the same thing. You know, you should have taken her to a better hospital. Why didn't you, take her to, like, take her abroad or take her to Apollo? So all these things, it's a mess, right? You are in a psychological mess. You don't know whether you have actually contributed to your wife's death, whether something more could have been done, and of course you are helpless. You are feeling that there is injustice, there is unfairness, all these things. I mean, from the spiritual point, everything. Now, my question is, how would you react to that situation? What would you think of doing if you were in that situation? Of course, I'm going through all this, the helplessness, the denial, the frustration, the hopelessness. Now, how would you cope with that situation? How would you react? What would be your immediate thoughts? What would you do? What are the options in front of us? If you were in this situation and you are feeling all this, how would you react? What are the options in front of you? What would be the next steps? We let the frustration grow, sit at home, Try to make her happy by doing all the possible things. Okay, sorry. Okay, look for help. Now, I forgot to mention, that at the point in November 2004, once she's dead, what would you do? Once she's dead. So what do you think? Okay, I'll probably ask a different question. What do you think K.N. Nair, from his position, would have done? Would take a break, probably, yes. Jijo, yes. I might do that. I want to take a break. I've been uh, running around from hospital to hospital, from oncologist to oncologist, trying to do the best possible for my wife. And I'm already feeling frustrated, lonely, stressed, fatigued, all these things. That maybe I'll take a break. What else? So there is something here earlier. Someone said, okay, seek someone's advice from whom you can help him to cope with the situation. Yes, plan forward. So who said injustice? Jijo, you mentioned injustice earlier. So,
Yeah.
So if there is injustice, what would you do?
No, I meant it in the way that he may feel that why only he is suffering. Why not others? Spiritual level.
Okay. Trying to find comfort during the bereavement period by seeking help. Yes. Okay. Now, what if what I took from that injustice is justice was not done in her case. I took her to all the doctors, I took her to all the hospitals, and they did not do a proper job of, identifying the diagnostics. It was delayed. And that was the reason why I lost my wife. So there is an injustice there, right? Now, if I go through that feeling, what would I do then?
He may have an emotional outburst.
Mm.
He may take out our anger on someone.
Yes. Have you seen that happening in your hospital?
Yeah, I have seen that.
So how do caregivers react? What do they do?
They may resort to abusing us.
Abuse.
Or they may just leave frustrated with our care.
Verbal, it could be physical, it could also get physical, right?
Yes.
In some stage, in some situations. Yes, so there's a lot of anger. That is a lot of anger against the system in general. It's not just the hospital, the doctors, everyone around you. Okay, Asha says, possible way to help others from what he had learned. Yeah, that is something, if I were in his position, probably I wouldn't think like that. My immediate reaction would be, this doctor did not diagnose this properly. I need to make sure that he learns a lesson. I may go sue him. I may, like Jijo mentioned, go in there and even have a physical outburst. But K. Nair decided, as Asha said, he was willing to accept what happened to his wife, but then he took a more positive approach. He decided, I'll try to ensure that someone else doesn't go through the same suffering as I did. Okay, that means not just him, his wife as well. So what did he do? He first went to IMA, asked them, is there any possible way that he can get involved in their home care program or whatever. IMA does a lot of these voluntary activities. So he wanted to be part of it. He did do it for some time. And then he came to us in Palim, India. And then he dedicated 24/7. I mean, he was there with our team 24 hours a day, continuously for almost 3 to 4 years until he had an accident and he could not walk properly because he had a knee injury. And I believe there was a knee replacement surgery also done. And it was tough for him to join the home care team. But what happened in between was he went to the level of managing one whole home care team, which was providing palliative care in Trivandrum within the city limits. So which meant, he was the person in charge of the entire team, including the doctor, the nurse, the physiotherapist. He knew who the patients were. He had the details of all his patients. He knew what support they needed at what point. He was the one organizing the home care visits. And he was always available over the phone 24/7 to help them out with whatever they require. Now, why did I say this, tell this story? Now, he is a volunteer for Palim India or palliative care. Now, let us not look at Palim India because Palim India is just a vehicle. Now, as far as K.N. Nair is concerned, like Asha said, he wants to help others from what he had learned and make sure that someone else doesn't go through the same suffering. Now, that is what he wants. Now, he joins Palim India or works with Palim India or IMA. Why? Because he sees this as a vehicle in which he can reach that point. Now, the reason why I told the story is behind every volunteer, there would be a story. Now, it would be unique. It need not necessarily be that person's wife dying or his dear and near ones dying. It could be something else. It could be an experience with the medical community. It could be one of their neighbors, seeing someone suffering, a neighbor suffering. It could be someone in pain. Now, there is always these kind of experiences which we go through along the way, and sometimes some people feel that this is unfair, this is unjust. We need to do something about it, and I would like to contribute my way, my bit to this thing, and that is how a volunteer is born. Now, so what is his or her role in palliative care? Again, I would wait for others to contribute. How all can they contribute? Someone earlier said that I can contribute by helping you design something for your patients. I think it was Anand who mentioned that. Yes. Anything else that I think it was Anand again who said that a person like me can actually create awareness or be involved in advocacy. Likewise, what else can a volunteer do? Okay. Social support, that's what you mentioned. Advocacy. Yes, Sinchu, yeah, spot on. Fundraising, because a lot of these things, how the health sector, especially the government system, is currently in India. It is always financially starved, cash starved. You may want to do a lot of things, good things for the patient and family, but unfortunately, you don't have the wherewithal, the resources to do that. Sometimes it might be even supporting a family with their, basic 2 square meals a day, food, and most often you also find that there is money involved. Now, spread the news, reassurance, emotional support of caregiver. Rebecca, thank you. Yes. So, what if I am a doctor or a nurse? I could actually be more involved, right? I can actually play a more active role. I can take care of, physical, relieving physical symptoms, other things also. So, the lot of things that a volunteer can do, as long as you intermediate, yes, between the patient, family, and staff members. they have a very critical role to play. A lot of things where we feel we are not able to do it, we are not able to provide the care to the patient or the family. If you have this team of volunteers with you, you may be able to achieve that and more. Sometimes it may go beyond what you really want. But it comes with all its own set of challenges, and we should be also clear, like we mentioned earlier, they're not working with the team for money, paid a salary or any of those things. So there is this tendency for complacency. Sometimes I may feel, okay, today I'm not feeling well, I will rather take rest, I will not go for this patient's care, whatever, those kind of things. So it's important to identify areas where a volunteer can contribute, just like you identified my capability on the technology side. There might be specific areas where someone might be able to contribute more. That is something which you have to identify. And also that person has to be able to earmark specific time and days so that it's more organized. Volunteers need to be screened. We need to also ask this question whether this person has the qualifications. Like for example, you are asking him to take care of the accounts, he or she should be qualified to take care of that. If we are asking him to provide, maybe a driver as the services as a driver, like transporting a patient, no, that is something which a volunteer can do easily. But does he have a driving license? I may want to provide that service. I may want to support the patient, in terms of transportation to the hospital. But then, do I have the wherewithal to do that? Do I have a vehicle? Now, these are things which we need to also identify. Formal application, of course, it may not be always practical, but at least an informal application and interview process helps to understand what his idea is and what is he looking for. So, and training, not this is something which is very, very important. Like we often see that, the heart is there. I would like to contribute as a volunteer. But then if I'm not trained in palliative care, if I don't understand the basics of palliative care, unintentionally, I may end up doing more harm than good. And you can see a lot of examples. You might have seen it in front of you. Like even silly things like, today everyone, because probably thanks to Corona, now everyone knows about hand hygiene. And we are all washing our hands multiple times a day. And the media, the social media, everywhere, we are taught how to take care of hand hygiene, how you wash your hands, how you clean all the deepest corners of your hands and all those things. Now, in palliative care, we know that it is absolutely essential that we look at hand hygiene, basic hand hygiene, before we actually go near a patient or handle a patient, because they're already in a vulnerable situation, their immunity is compromised already. Slightest of an the possibility of an infection, and that person might be, even they may not be even able to withstand that, the infection, and it can actually kill a patient. So when I'm involved in such care activities, when I'm doing something for a patient, I should also be trained in these kind of things. What I should be careful about, the do's, the don'ts. Like for example, so I understand that you've undergone that communication session. Now we realize how a simple word that we utter, how devastating it can be to someone in that situation, right? Sometimes you might be saying things to console a patient or the family member, and instead of consoling them, it might prove to be counterproductive. It might work the other way around. Now, these are things where, these are areas where a volunteer should be provided training, and unless and until he's trained, he should not be considered a volunteer. And once they're trained, they're on the field, you know, being involved in the palliative care delivery, whichever way they are involved in. They also need to be supervised and periodically reviewed, like just like a normal staff member would be. You know, typically you will have your own evaluation done every year, probably by your seniors or whoever. So similar things should be there for volunteers also. Like we discussed earlier, the toughest challenge here is understanding what makes them do it and what they're looking for. When someone comes forward to volunteer, we should be clear, you know, what makes them do it. Like in the case of K.N. Nair, we are clear why he's there. What is he looking for? Now, if I'm able to identify that, then it is much clearer for me, you know, what we can offer them, how we can keep them happy and contributing. And unless they are happy, they'll not continue with us, unless they are able to get something out of this, because it's not money. Let us remember that. We are not paying them money. So it's not something which makes them do these things. It is something else. So unless we identify what it is, we will not be able to keep them happy, and we may simply lose them. And let's also remember that there are hundreds of K.N. Nairs around us. It's not one person. There are so many of them. It's about reaching out to them, you know, making sure that, you know, more such K.N. Nairs come forward to support the activities. We'll just touch upon a couple of other areas like collaboration. Now, again, going by the definition is very simple. It's working together to achieve a well-defined common purpose. Now, here in our case, it's about providing care to the patient and the family, essentially palliative care. Now, what is the relevance of collaboration here? Why should we collaborate? So the idea behind collaboration is, you know, each one of us have something unique, something to contribute to make the world better. Put simply, you know, I have probably some knowledge of engineering, I have some communication skills, and I have a few ideas also. Like when Anand mentioned in the beginning, you know, for a patient, if you need to provide some physical support devices, whatever it is, maybe even a wheelchair, you want new ideas to come in. You want people with technology background or an engineering background to come in and help you figure out what suits best for that patient. Now, that is the whole concept, right? It's about merging new ideas, expertise. When it comes together, what does it offer? It offers better productivity. There is also scope for innovation, large amount of innovation. And that is what we see happening with COVID, right? The government reaches out to the public, says, come, we need your help. What help are they asking for? Whatever, whichever way you can help. Like, it is not just medicines. It is not just, you know, what do you call, going out and taking care of these patients. It is about maybe coming out with an innovative, what do you call, a ventilator system, or designing a new PPE kit, or hand sanitizers, simple things, you know, hand sanitizer, we don't have enough of it. Can you come forward and, you know, just a moment, hold on, sorry. So we need hand sanitizers. We don't have enough of it. I mean, the quantity is not enough. We need more. We need masks. It goes on and on. Now, it's a very, very good example for collaboration. And people have responded. People have responded. Sometimes it is about providing the funds for this. Sometimes it is about offering new ideas, like you mentioned, new design concepts. Someone comes forward with a 10,000 rupee ventilator system. So all these things are possible. The innovation, the productivity goes up. And today, the situation is also changing rapidly. Like earlier, it used to be more or less 1 or 2 NGOs in a particular locality. I'm talking about Kerala. I'm not talking about the rest of India. Even in Kerala, we're talking about something like, in one district, probably 1 or 2 NGOs in the field of palliative care, maybe a couple of CBOs as well. Okay, when I say NGOs, I'm referring to non-government organizations. And when I say CBO, I'm talking about community-based organizations. Like it could be a local community which, say for example, even you might have seen these church groups which are actively involved in palliative care in a locality. Of course, that is a community based on religion, but there could be other communities. Like for example, there are Rotarians who are involved, or those kind of communities also, they come forward with this thing. Now, today there are more such people who are involved in palliative care. And let us also not forget that the government itself, the public health system, is actively involved in palliative care. That was not the case earlier on. Now, it's all good. It's all happening now. Even the PHC, the local PHC, has a palliative care trained nurse, at least, if not a doctor. Most of the ASHA workers in Kerala are trained in palliative care. So these things are good. This ensures that more people have access to these services. But it also brings with it its own set of challenges. And if we need to overcome those challenges, we need to have collaboration. We need to have a collaborative approach. Now, what are the challenges? I mean, when I say challenges, can someone say, what are the challenges if so many people are involved in palliative care or in healthcare? Let us look at healthcare in general. What is the challenge? I mean, is it not good? I mean, no people are involved means better the output and more patients get the help. Where is the challenge? Anyone? I'll ask you one more question. So in your department, PMR, how many volunteers come in on a daily basis? Or how many from the general public come in?
We have some groups that come in.
Okay. And so
Bring the
if there are
patients.
groups, sorry?
They bring the patients. They arrange transportation for the patients in their vehicle.
Okay. That's all. Is there anything else that
they also provide assistive devices, medicines.
Okay.
Monthly follow-up.
So has there been a situation where you had to ask someone not to do something or not to bring a patient here or something like that, someone to, have you had a difficult situation to manage essentially? That's my question.
Regarding?
With these groups coming in, working with you, in terms of transportation or whatever.
We have found them to be helpful.
We have found to be helpful. Very good.
We didn't have any.
Okay. Now, within your own hospital, the medical college hospital, what about other departments? Have you had, like for example, the neurology department? I'm sure you have that you had that requirement to work with them, right? Often. Sorry.
Yes.
Okay. And how has it been, the experience? Have they been very cooperative. It has always worked like smoothly. Has there been any situation where you've felt like, there is lack of cooperation or support from other department, maybe from other heads of department, maybe from the management side?
Yeah, mainly we interact with them for consultations for our patients.
Okay.
So at times, of course, it gets delayed. Uh, at those instances, yeah, we feel they should support us more.
Support us more. Now, when you say there are delays, do you think there have been situations where it was purposefully delayed?
I won't say purposefully, but I think it's more because of they may have thought it is a trivial situation, so they need not intervene.
Okay. So we have had this often. We have seen this. Like, for example, um, I'm sure you are aware that we conduct a palliative care OP in the Medical College Hospital.
Yes.
Do you know how patients reach there? It is mostly referrals.
Okay. Yeah.
Specialists refer patients to our department, I mean, to palliative care. Now, of course, we expect normally, okay, whenever there is a need, the experts or the particular department is happy to engage us, call us in, say that, okay, this patient needs this support. Let us work together and try to solve this problem. Now, that is the ideal situation. But do you think that happens often? I can tell you from reality, it doesn't happen. Now, this is an experience shared by many doctors also. Most often, there are other issues that come into the picture, like one specialist cannot accept another specialist. There could be contradictions, uh, different viewpoints, which can be a cause of concern. There would be this simple things like ego which comes into play. Like, it's my patient. This is your patient. How often have you heard that? My patient, your patient. Patient is the same. But unfortunately, we keep referring to them as my patient and your patient. And therein starts the problem. Now, this is where collaboration comes in. If we need to deliver the best for the patient and the family, there needs to be a lot of collaboration. Now, it's not just about organizations. Between organizations, between individuals, between departments, there is a need for a lot more collaborative working so that we can maximize our results and make sure that the patient gets the best. In our case, what we do is, I'm just putting this as an example. Now, Parameter works with a lot of other entities. We call them link centers. Now, this could be, like I mentioned earlier, community-based organizations. It could be some, maybe even other NGOs. And some of these are also, one of the link center could be the Medical College Hospital itself. Now, what happens there? We work with the government, we work with the government medical college, we work with the departments, ensure that the what is what the medical college is not able to provide in terms of, say, for example, morphine. Medical college does not have, they don't stock or dispense morphine. Now, when there is a situation where we need the patients need to be given morphine for pain care, we come in. Now, similarly with paraplegic patients or people in such situations, a lot more can be done by us. So there is a lot of collaboration that happens between these entities. In the case of the Medical College Hospital, now we are offered a room without rent on a daily basis. Our staff, our doctors, nurses, volunteers are allowed to come into the system freely. We are allowed to use the facility there. We are allowed to see the patients who need the care. And all these things require a lot of understanding between the government system, the hospital management, the heads of department, as well as our team. The Pallium India's team includes doctors, nurses, all of them. Now, when we are able to do this, we are able to reach out to a larger number of people. Our care reaches larger number of people. If not, it may be limited to a few whom we can directly take care of. Like Pallium India by itself, maybe we can take care of 100 patients. And even for them to access our services, it's going to be difficult. Now, when we work with other such entities, we can actually reach out to a larger number. More people get the benefit out of it. So I'll just quickly take through this story of Geeta. Actually, a patient of ours. I mean, she was with our under our care for some time. Then, she was paralyzed. She had a surgery, and then that was the reason for the paralysis. And then, she didn't. Of course, there was this initial physiotherapy and other things that needed to be done, which was provided. And then the big question mark: what next? How do I go forward? That is when someone came forward, and one of our volunteers took up the challenge and taught her how to make jewelry. That was fine, but then the next challenge comes in. Making jewelry is fine. How do I convert it to money? You need to sell it. How do I market it? Now someone came up with a brilliant idea. Why don't we do it online? Fine, you can do it online, but then who is going to do it? Now Geeta does not know the ABCD of going online. She doesn't know how to use a computer. Now someone else, another team comes forward and says, okay, we will teach her how to use a computer. Then she needs to use the computer at home. So she doesn't have a computer. A well-wisher comes forward, donates a computer, says, okay, I'll donate a laptop. And then the local provider, the network provider, comes forward and offers a network connectivity. She didn't have a proper road leading to her home. And then the neighbors got together. They said, okay, we will give bit more land from our areas and make sure that there is a proper wider access, which meant a vehicle can pass through to her, reach her house. And then the panchayat got involved, and they made a more reasonable quality road. It's not a tar road, but at least what you call a metal surface, whatever. So now this is a perfect example of collaboration. Now today she earns for herself and her entire family. She takes care of her parents, and she is the single earning member in her family. She supports the entire family. Now, she required a lot of support from the society. Different people got involved. The government, the panchayat got involved. The neighbors got involved. Pallium India did its part. The doctors played their role. So when everything comes together, the net result is we are able to achieve much more than individually what we can. That is the idea behind collaboration. But if we assume that just because we are looking at a common cause, our self-interest will disappear, that's a fallacy. It doesn't happen that way. Like for example, when I think of going into medical college and providing care, of course, I have Pallium India's interest in mind. The medical college has to take care of its interests, understandably so. So what happens, unless we respect each other's self-interest also, we consider that also, we will not be able to work together. So these are very rare situations or very unique personalities who can think beyond all these things. Self-interest is not there, the ultimate of altruism. But then how many Mother Teresa's do we know? It could be 1 in a million. But then, we understand that as our own limitations, we have our own egos to deal with, our own, jealousy and whatnot. We are all essentially built like that. So we understand our limitations, and still we try to work together. Now that is a big challenge. It's not easy for me. And when we work together, there is one more challenge that we need to see. Now, it's good, a group coming together and working together, but then there again, we need someone, some kind of leadership to give guidance, to make sure that the collaborative effort goes in a particular direction, achieves the results, the goals that we set out for. Otherwise, again, it might end up as a wasted effort. And different people would be leading to different directions. It doesn't give the kind of impact that is required. So where does it start? I believe it starts here with me. I am the center. If I wait for someone else to come in and take care of this, take the leadership, tell me what to do, it's not going to happen. We need to start with ourselves. And it starts with the process of inquiry, where we do a lot of introspection probably. We try to find out, what is it that I can offer, what I can do for my community, for my patients. What is it that I find pleasure in? Those are the kind of internal questions that we have to keep asking. What is it that is most important for my patients? A lot of these questions. And you know what that leads to? It leads to innovation, like we discussed in the beginning. Now, once we are clear that a patient needs, in PMR, I'm taking that original example, where a patient needs a supportive device or a structure which will help him, to be mobile. Now, I understand that it is not readily available in the market, but I am very clear that my patient should be able to access this, and that's going to make life easier for him or her. Now, I need someone to work with so that, we've solved the problem together. And that there is a lot of innovation that happens. It is not just about the innovation in terms of the machine that we build. It could be social innovation also. Like, for example, Kerala is a very good example, right? How we innovated, like palliative care is a very good example. Like, palliative care was a concept which was already there in the Western world. Most of the developed countries had palliative care when we started off here in Calicut in 1992. Now, what was unique about the Kerala model? Why is it always talked about? The uniqueness was in its approach, because until that point of time, it was considered that palliative care is only applicable to the developed world, where you need that financial strength, you need the facilities, the healthcare facilities to be able to provide this. You need the kind of people, the number of trained doctors, nurses who can provide palliative care, and that was kind of a specialized area, right? So here, what happened was, in Kerala, the community got involved. And probably this is the first time that the community actually got involved in healthcare. And that changed everything. So there was a social innovation that happened with volunteers being part of healthcare system. They were actually contributing. They were trying to solve the problems for the healthcare system, which includes the doctors, the nurses, the government. They could actually count on this social, the social capital that we talked about earlier. So there was an innovation which made us a Kerala model more popular even across India and even outside. There are a lot of other low and middle income countries which are trying to follow the same model, what we have developed in Kerala, where the community is getting more and more involved in healthcare. And in fact, in 2014, if I remember correctly, even the World Health Assembly has given a suggestion. In fact, it is not a suggestion, it is kind of a mandate that every member state, that is every country, has to actually work with the community accept volunteers, work with other NGOs and entities, integrate them into healthcare, and also integrate the principles of palliative care into healthcare. Now, once these kind of things happen, it inspires a lot of people. Like what happened in Kerala inspired a lot more people who came forward and said, okay, I would like to offer these similar services in my state, my district. And people started getting trained. People started coming to Trivandrum, to Calicut, to get themselves trained in palliative care and then go back and start doing it by themselves. Now, that is inspiration and that creates a large impact. What is the kind of impact? I would say it is that ripple effect that we are familiar with. The individual, you know, it goes to the next level, you know, the community, the society. So it goes on and on. It goes beyond the boundaries, geographical areas. You know, it could go global. Now, it all starts here. I am part of it. I have to play my role. If I feel there is a need for change, there is some small thing that I can do, I should start doing it. And that is where, you know, it inspires someone else to continue with that. So it's very simple. You need to understand what are the other partners need. You know, like for example, I should know what medical college wants so that I can work with medical college better. So we need to know what our common goal is and also understand each of our stakeholders' needs are. Now, how do I identify that? It's again simple. We need to listen. We need to listen carefully to our stakeholders, to our partners. Like when I listen carefully, and again, these are things which I've already learned in communication, right? Active listening. That is how you identify what the patient needs. Now, the same thing applies here. Now, if I listen carefully to you, Anand, Jijo, Mom, I understand what you are looking for. And once I understand that, I am able to tune my offering accordingly. I am able to work with you better. So listening again is the key. So I'll just take 5 more minutes. Oh, I think we are nearing the end. Hardly 5 minutes left. So advocacy and fundraising. You just touch upon that. Now, again, this is something which came up earlier. Advocacy is about creating that awareness. So the definition is, it's drawing the community's attention to an issue, specific issue. Now, in our case, it is palliative care. Now, the more the awareness, and here I believe most of you feel that it is people like me who are not healthcare professionals who should be doing that. But is it our responsibility alone? Yes, I agree, it is my responsibility too. But I believe it is each one of us who needs to be responsible. You are equally responsible for the advocacy work. You need to be the advocate of the patients. I am also prepared to be with you. So it's about advocacy means being an advocate for the patient and the family who needs the healthcare. And we need to bring the attention of the community so that, you know, the impact will be larger. Like, for example, I may be able to help one individual or maybe a couple of families. That's it. But if I make sure that, you know, larger community is aware of the need, I'm sure a lot more people will jump in. A lot more people will contribute. Not just in terms of, you know, money, it could be in terms of other resources as well. And it changes the attitudes and behavior, the approach. It changes policies, the government policies. I've just given a few examples. Now, reform institutions like medical curriculum, nursing curriculum, now it is slowly getting in, you know, palliative care and pain care is also being considered part of the curriculum. Now, how does it affect, how does it happen? Now, we need to work with the MCI, the Medical Council of India, or INC in the case of nurses. Now, until that happens, you know, there are always, we are looking at limitations in terms of the number of people who can provide the service, in terms of access to opioids, in terms of the government's approach to palliative care. Now, once the awareness, the advocacy is there, the advocacy can also help us raise funds. If we put it simply, unless I am aware of what palliative care can do for an individual or a family or the society, I will not be willing to contribute. Now, if I go to someone and ask for 10 rupees for a palliative care patient who is 70 years old, and I go to another person and I ask for again the same 10, someone else goes to the same person, ask for 10 rupees for a child, 10-year-old child, who needs this 10 rupees for maybe taking a bus to school. There's every likelihood, the chances are that this person will get the 10 rupees because it is for the kid. And I may not get any support because people may think, oh, it's for a 70-year-old. Because they don't understand what is the relevance of that 10 rupees and how helping this 70-year-old can actually help the society or actually help that family. Now, unless people are aware of it, you will not be able to get more support from the community also. So these are things which you know of, you have seen enough of this. And I will add social media, a very effective tool in advocacy today. Of course, the clubs, associations, residents associations, press, media, and these are things which each one of us can do. Like you independently can go talk about this need, spread the message, spread the awareness, and that goes a long way in helping these patients and their families. And coming to fundraising, I'm just rushing through because of lack of time. Some basics that we need to understand. Fundraising is it's not about selling, like, you sit across the table and convince someone to give money for something that they or he or she does not need. It doesn't happen that way. Now, it's always about things from the same perspective, seeing the same views, the goals. Now, once that happens, you and I work together. Imagine Jijo and I are together trying to solve a problem. Now, I am sure that Jijo will join me to help a patient or the family. Similarly, it works the same way with the donor, because the donor needs to be clear about why he is supporting us, is with us. He can only see it when it actually gives benefit to a family or a patient. Now, those stories should be told. Those stories should actually appeal to the individuals whom we are talking to. And then they will open their hearts and minds. And then naturally the wallets will also open. Now, if we focus on the money, if we keep asking for the money, it will not happen. You're not going to get it. And money, let us remember that it's just a means to an end. It is not the money that we need. We need the money for solving something else. And sometimes it may so happen that if it is medicines that you need, someone may be willing to donate the medicine. We don't actually need the money. We just need the medicine. So again, it's about being a good listener. We can't actually get money out of someone else's pocket. Otherwise, we'll have to resort to other means like, dacoity, robbery, whatever it is. So that's not the idea, right? We want them to donate voluntarily again. So a successful fundraising actually involves a lot of storytelling. Now, today, I've been telling a lot of stories. I've been telling you stories about Ken Nair, Geeta, so many such stories. There are hundreds and thousands of such stories around us. Those stories need to be told, and therein lies the connectivity between advocacy and fundraising. Once people understand these stories, they tend to support better. They need to support in terms of money or otherwise. And share your problems too, what your challenges are. Everywhere, you cannot just keep talking about your success. There could be failures. We can share those failures as well, because again, let us understand that the donor is also on the same side. we are both together in trying to solve a patient's problem. And of course, you should know whom to ask, what to ask for, and when. There are other opportunities like grants and campaigns. Now you need specialized skills to achieve those things. Like organizing an event is not a small thing. Like you've seen fundraising events. There are big rock shows that are being conducted to raise funds for some activity. Now those require a lot more of organizing skills. Of course, it is available. Sometimes you may have it, or you have people whom you can rely upon to have those skills brought to the table. And campaigns, social media campaigns, you have seen enough of them, very successful campaigns which have raised a lot of money globally. So it's about identifying what our core capabilities are, what resources we have, and better utilizing those resources to the maximum. So I think it's already 4:30 now. Maybe I can take a couple of questions, or if you have other questions, I'm always open to questions over the email or whatever, WhatsApp, whatever it is. Rajlakshmi?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
You can ask your questions now. We can take another 5 minutes if you want.
Yeah. I'm so sorry that we have to compress it in 1.5 hours. Normally, this is like normal situation. It would be like a 5 to 6 hour program, but yeah, we have our own limitations here. We can always take these discussions offline if you want. That is also possible.
Sir, in your experience, that you have mentioned that the multidisciplinary, that the team working together as a team is not that much successful like that. Can you tell me the real reason in your experience that you have been through?
Okay, a very typical example. Now, an oncologist and a palliative care specialist. I'm sure you must have seen this in front of you.
Yeah.
Like, suppose I am an oncologist. I am the expert in this field in cancer care.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at what point would I be comfortable asking a patient to go meet a palliative care physician? Can you tell me at what point, if you were an oncologist, at what point would you tell that patient or the family to go and consult a palliative care physician? Maybe he's sitting next door to you. It's in your next cabin, At what point would you do that?
Maybe when the patient have no choice. I mean, when he has multiple kind of problems that cannot be handled by one doctor itself.
Absolutely, you're right, and that's what happens. Now, today, since you have gone through the entire palliative care training program, in your opinion, when should that consultation happen? Like, if there is a diagnosis of cancer today, I'm an oncologist, the patient comes to me. At what point should I tell him or her to actually consult, or maybe even ask the palliative care specialist to join for the consultation? When do you think is the ideal time or the situation where the palliative care physician should be involved?
At the point of
diagnosis.
Absolutely. Now, what is happening now? If I'm an oncologist, I'm a specialist, I'm not comfortable letting the patient or telling him or her that you need help from someone else, not just me. It probably because of the ego, or the patient sees me as the ultimate specialist who is going to take care of all his problems. And I don't want to let him down. That is probably the reason. It could be other reasons, like, what if I ask him to go there and then he doesn't come back? Now, I'm just taking the example of a palliative care physician. I've seen this happening between a neurologist and an oncologist. Now, there could be a neuro situation coupled with a oncology situation,
Yeah.
Sometimes, that's what I said earlier, my patient versus your patient. It could be like your PMR. Probably it's not the most glamorous of departments, I'm sure, in medical college. Forgive me.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
have
yeah.
you felt so? Have you ever felt that you're not considered at par with an oncology or a neurology department?
Yeah.
You have felt it. Why does
Yeah.
that happen? You're doing the same kind of work. You're all medical professionals. You're all MBBS. Most often, you are not even called doctor.
Yeah.
I've seen that happening.
Mhm.
It's a sad. Why is it happening like that? So there are within the medical system also there are hierarchies, which unwritten laws, which are there. Why does it happen? Because we are all human beings.
Yeah.
That's the only reason I can find. We are insecure. Probably we are sometimes a bit of overconfidence. Sometimes, like I said, ego, jealousy, professional rivalry. All these things. It could be a mix of all these things. So I believe these are things that could be resolved. There are solutions, but if we have this common objective of focusing on the patient, a lot of these problems can be solved. But I guess, did I answer your question, Dr. Mang?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir. It's clear.
Mung, right? Sorry, again I missed it.
No, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, doctor. Any more questions coming in?
No more.
Okay. Sir, I think we need to wind up. We have exceeded our time. Thank you,
Yes.
Vinod, sir, for this wonderful session. It has been a very big knowledge gain during this 1.5 hours. Thank you all for joining us and for that active participation. So we can see you next Thursday with the topic of end of life care taken by Dr. M.R. Rajagopal. Thank you all. Bye.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. Thanks for the cooperation. Thanks for the involvement.